Welcome to the NewSpace India podcast, a bi-weekly talk show that exclusively captures insightful conversations with people contributing to advancement of space activities in India. The NewSpace India podcast is pleased to announce our association with Dassault Systems, a global leader in providing business and people with collaborative virtual environments to imagine sustainable innovations. Dassault Systems solutions support startups, small and medium-sized enterprises, and original equipment manufacturers in developing disruptive solutions for space launches and satellite propulsion. Recently, a supply chain digitization study with Dassault Systems was conducted to provide a foundational understanding of the supplier landscape in the Indian space ecosystem. Please use the link in the description to download the public white paper of the results of this study, which will also give you a perspective on how ready Indian suppliers are to enter the global space market. In this episode, we have Chirag Doshi, the CEO and Managing Director of Walchandnagar Industries, giving an overview of how Walchandnagar has been contributing to the Indian space program over the last 50 years and diversified itself from being present in sugar plants, cement plants, boilers, heavy-duty gears, to becoming a tier 1 supplier to the aerospace industry in India. Hi, Chirag, welcome to the show.
Hi, Narayan. Thank you for having me on this show. It's quite an honor to be here.
So Walchandnagar is, one of the first brands that I recognize when it comes to the supplier base of ISRO and, your contribution to the Indian space program over the last 50 years or so. So it's a very exciting, phenomena that you could be one of the early industry participants to work with ISRO in maturing the space program. So I wanted to take time with you to understand, how was your journey in the progress since the 70s? And to kick off this conversation, let's begin with you telling us the history of Walchandnagar and, how the journey began, who are the people involved and, your early days.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously it's a very interesting story about how Walchandnagar, ultimately got into the business of helping the country develop its sort of space program. And obviously it starts from the philosophy that our founder, always had. And as you may know, Walchand Hirachand was a pre-independent India industrialist who really worked with a lot of other industrialists to make India self-sufficient. And that is really the philosophy that Walchandnagar has lived by for more than 120 odd years now, 110 years now. And so while he was sort of focusing on doing sugar, cement, power, and that's how the sort of the history of the company started, where we became a sugar machinery equipment manufacturer, then a power equipment manufacturer. And all of this kind of stemmed from the fact that India must become self-sufficient once we become independent and not have to depend on others going forward. And, Prime Minister Modi's Atmanirbhar Bharat concept today really evolves from this kind of a thinking. And so while we were, in the 60s, probably India's premier engineering and design company, that was the time in the late 60s, early 70s that India started thinking about becoming a self-sufficient power in space research, in defense, and in nuclear power generation. And, all of these three were sort of integrated at that time. And while the government knew that they couldn't do this all on their own through public sector enterprise, they needed a couple of companies from the private sector that they could work with to help them really start this journey. And I think the number one thing in this was secrecy, right? At that time, they didn't want anyone to know in the United States of America, or even on the Russian side, although Russia and India were friends at that time, but really the rest of the world didn't need to know what India was doing. And so they needed firms that they could trust with design, with engineering, with technology. And so the interesting story is that in 1973, um, there was a gentleman by the name of Shri Shashi Kumar, who was a scientist at VSSE, and he visited Walchandnagar in 1971, 1972 maybe. And he came here and he saw our infrastructure and he said, you know what, this is a company that can work with us. And with our sort of nation building history and patriotic angle of Walchandnagar, they looked at a company that could really work closely. And Shri Abdul Kalam ji was a he was what should I say? He was a senior scientist or a research scientist in DRDO at the time. And his first visit to Walchandnagar was in 1971 or 1972 as a research scientist. And he really started the privatization of India's program by giving Walchandnagar its first job. So that's how it started. The SLV3 was the launch vehicle that we worked on, and that was really the first, what shall I say, the drop of how we really got into then evolving over 50 years in India's space program. So I always say this, Walchand Hirachand may be our founder, but I think Dr. Abdul Kalam was truly our godfather when it came to, Walchandnagar entering the space program, in India. So that's the history.
Right. And what was the motivation for the ISRO guys to come to you, for example? Because, they could have as well said, we will do everything by ourselves. We will employ more and more engineers in our sector. We'll import machinery from abroad and we will keep everything under secrecy. And why should they get, a private company or even a publicly traded company, in your case, for example, involved?
I think secrecy was one of the big issues there. I'm not sure everything that happened in the public sector stayed secret all the time, and I think they required more hands on deck. Just generally brighter, smarter, more intelligent people to be also participating with their designers and their engineers. I think, of course, I was not there at the time, but I've had many conversations with my father on this, and I think the I think the logic was that organizations at that time, the DRDOs and the ISROs or VSSE at that time, they were filled with extremely intelligent scientists, right? And they could create, they could design, they could no, they can even today make anything we wanted, but on paper. And how do you bring it from paper to reality? I think they realized that heavy fabrication and manufacturing companies like ours that had the brain power of the planner, the machinist, the manufacturing engineering guys, the industrial engineering guys, to put paper to actual product manufacturing, doing the R&D, creating the pilot. I think that had to be done at a private sector level if they wanted to do it quickly, secretly, and scale it up. I mean, of course, the scale up has only just happened, but I mean, ultimately, the plan was that we needed to scale this up completely. So I think that was the motivation of moving this from just a public sector project into a public-private partnership, which is what it's really been for the last 50 years. So I think that was the motivation to sort of blend two strengths, something they didn't have and something we had, and bring it together and prove that these two teams could work together to make this happen. So I think that was really the motivation more than anything else.
Right, and the early days, it was the design capabilities of ISRO alongside, them depending on your manufacturing capabilities, or which was the earliest projects, and what was the mode of engagement?
Yeah, so if we had to break it up really simply, they were doing all the design, and we spent the first, I would say, 6 to 8 years or even 10 years, really only making things like toolings, jigs, fixtures, anything that was required from a methoding and a manufacturing perspective. welding technologies. I mean, we had no clue about the kind of materials that were to be used at the time of launching these vehicles, and the kind of material that we use today. Even my team here in Walchandnagar is doing research and development 3 years in advance, 4 years in advance. I mean, materials that we may want to use 2, 3 years later, we are working on today, right? So at that time in the 1970s, we were clueless. Not just us, but the entire country was clueless about the kind of metallurgy that may be required, and the amount of time and energy and effort that went into developing those processes was really where most of the time. And then, of course, a lot of time was spent in documentation, inspection, testing, before we could even put that first launch vehicle in place in space, right? So at least the first one that we worked on was the SLV3, and as you wrote in your mail to me, and as we have seen, the first vehicle took like 8-9 years to make, one vehicle, and it was such a tiny vehicle, just because we needed to get the manufacturing and the welding and the jigs and the fixtures and all of that perfect, so that there would not be failure today. And then once we got that perfected, then it would make it much easier for us to scale up the manufacturing going forward, right? So I think that was the first decade of engagement was just that, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and that's very interesting because at this point of time, even today, getting contracts from ISRO and the contracting mechanism was also extremely difficult if you have to develop something with them. How was the collaboration then? Because of course, you're doing something very risky. There's a very high chance of failure. It's not a procurement order directly where you can build to some heritage or build to quality and say we are producing this and we can assure quality, right? So how was the risk sharing mechanism put into place?
Yeah, I think all credit, and anyone who sits here and says that it is difficult and impossible to work with government agencies should come and have a conversation with me, because I mean, DRDO, ISRO, from that day till today, most magnificent partners anyone could ask for. They have held our hand, I would say, all the way through the 50 years that we've been associated. In those first 10-15 years, the hand holding was far more than it is today, because obviously we are much more mature as an organization today. But at that time, it required them to do capital investment, because obviously we didn't have the wherewithal to be able to do investment in the kind of infrastructure that was going to be needed. So they were absolutely open in supporting us with capital expenditure, with setting up facilities for us over here in Walchandnagar. Um, all material procurement was done by them, so working capital was not tied up, which continues today too, by the way. That they do pretty much all of the material procurement, because of they can buy at scale, and the materials are very, very unique and not easy to find. Um, but they were, and so much communication, so much what shall I say, openness to get feedback from a private sector player. You sometimes you'd feel like, I know it, and you have to do it my way. But they realize that for this to be successful, uh, they have to be open to listening to what comes from our side. And that openness has remained even today. I mean, there is a reason why we have had what, two failures in 50 years of launches, and not one of those failures was fatal from a human perspective, and it was caught early, and it had nothing to do with the fabrication of the launch vehicle, right? So that the communication and relationship that we had built um, over these 50 years, and what was done in the initial 10-15 years, is really what built the foundation for that level of trust. And like you said, it's very difficult to get jobs from ISRO today. And the logic is that when ISRO and Walchandnagar have worked together from the beginning to build out all of this infrastructure here, and the technologies, the welding, the jigs, fixtures, toolings have all been built for them, and there has never been a failure yet, touch wood. Why would we want to go anywhere else? right? And you, when it ain't broke, you don't need to fix it. And you, that's what true partnership and what true public private partnership is all about. And I'm hoping that through the Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme and all that has been announced over the last few months by Prime Minister Modi, that all agencies all over the country will now work with their private sector partners in a and use this model, the ISRO Walchand model, as a benchmark for what private public private partnership in this country really means, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, that's very, very interesting insight from a historical perspective as such. So, can you give a estimate on how actually the business has evolved, not just before ISRO, even pre-ISRO collaboration? What percentage of business does space make up for your, overall business at the moment, and how it's evolved over the last 50 years?
Yeah, sure. I mean, before 1972, the entire turnover and of our business was only from sugar machinery and cement machinery. That's it, right? And even through most of the 70s, 80s, 90s, I would say up to 2013, 14, our nearly 80% of our turnover and business was from what we call our legacy EPC business, right? Sugar equipment, power equipment, cement machinery. And really only 15-20% of our turnover was from our what we call our strategic businesses, which is not just space, but defense and nuclear. And what we realized is that actually our core strength lies in the high value added business of manufacturing and fabrication. And so if you go to today, nearly 90% of my turnover comes from defense, aerospace, nuclear, and gearboxes, and maybe 10% comes from our legacy businesses, which are now only products, which is our cement business and our sugar centrifugal business. So the whole model has shifted completely. But the reason the model also shifted is because ISRO also embarked on a plan of scalability, right? As you know, through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, they were doing like one launch every, well, first it was one launch every 6, 7, 8 years, and then it moved to one launch every 3, 4 years to one launch every 2 years. And only in 2013, 14, 15 did they really start seeing the value and the benefit that India can provide to the world by the fact that we are probably, not probably, we are most definitely the cheapest, launch vehicle manufacturer in the world, not just the cheapest, but the safest. And now it becomes a business model for the government and for ISRO to scale this up. And so when they approached us, saying, guys, you need to scale up, and we're going to do 6 launches a year, we didn't believe it at first, and they've done it, and kudos to them. And we've also had to sort of ramp up our business to make that happen for them. And now we're talking about 12 launches a year, 18 launches a year, human flight mission. Of course, we've done Mangalyaan, we've done Chandrayaan, we've done all the GSLVs that have gone up in that. So in fact, it was ISRO and NPCIL and DRDO that in fact helped us relook at our business model and revamp our entire portfolio to now be a pure play space, defense, nuclear, heavy manufacturing company, right? We've kind of even shed a lot of our legacy businesses permanently.
Right. And when you talked about this evolution to volumes, you talked about how you started from jigs and fixtures and then moving up. So can you talk from a technology delivery perspective as to starting from jigs and fixtures to what is the transition to now?
So the technology has evolved by and large as a fallout of whatever design changes happen at the ISRO level, right? So over the last 40, 50 years, I mean, the creation of more toolings, more jigs, more fixtures is ongoing. I think the maximum amount of technology scalability that has happened is in the welding side of it. So we have invested, I would say, close to, um, in the last 10 years, 6 years, I would say we've invested close to 55, 60 crores of rupees. So maybe about $8, $9 million in just developing special purpose machines and welding stations to take care of all the multiple materials that we are working with, right? And that has been the biggest impact that I would say, which a lot of companies in India have not been able to deliver to to ISRO, that we have been able to, successfully uh, manage every single challenge that they've thrown at us when it comes to the different materials that they want to work with. And so that has been the biggest technology enhancement, besides the fact that we have put in nearly uh, another 50, 100, 50, 80 crores in machine capacity, which has evolved substantially, um, so that we could do the scale part of it, right? We wanted to make sure that we could deliver them 6, 7 segments per year when we were earlier delivering one. And so that's where the maximum investment has come. Manpower training, of course. Today, as we speak, 45% of all my resources in my company are focused only on the aerospace business, which, maybe 10 years ago may have been only 10, 15%. So that's the kind of scaling that we've done to cater to their desire to want to scale from a technology. And now, of course, the next stage that we are going to be working on is composites. And I know many people have already got a head start on the composite side, maybe for airplanes and automobiles and things like that. But the composites need at a aerospace level are completely different and much more challenging. And we are in fact in the process of putting together a investment plan to start our own sort of uh, composites play. And this continues with the theme that we want to be 5 years ahead, right? What's going to be the material that's going to be used 4 or 5 years from now? And I don't think anyone will debate that the world is moving from metal to composite, for a launch vehicle requirement. So that's the next play, the way I see it.
Right, and in fact, we have a very interesting question from a person from the NewSpace India community, specifically on some of the rocket motor casings stuff that you guys work on. This person has basically asked, if the manufacturing processes of these motor casings have improved over time based on ISRO's inputs, and what is the kind of processes that you have to get around welding defects, and also perhaps some of the rejection rate that you have for these, and how do you see any composite motor cases being produced in the coming years?
Yeah, so absolutely great question. And so just on the first half of the question on the rocket motor casings, so yes, that's exactly what we do. That is our bread and butter. And uh, the manufacturing processes have improved over time, both ways, because like I said at the beginning, ISRO depends on us to give them feedback on how to improve the product and the manufacturing ease of making those rocket motor casings. So that's really, it all kind of comes together, right? That's why we work on the welding on the material 2, 3 years in advance, so that all these rejections and welding failures need to happen at that time, not when the order actually comes. Having said that, as whoever has asked that question is obviously quite clued in on welding as a process, and there are bound to be welding um failures that happen even during the time of making the motor casing. It's very low. Our welding rejection rates are uh, in single digits, if even that much. So percentage, I mean, and especially with the creative materials that we work with. But we have a very, very robust, not us, ISRO and us together, a very robust inspection process. So that's what takes time more than the actual fabrication and machining of the casing. that we constantly have to stop and measure and inspect to make sure we don't move to the next step without making sure that there are no rejections. So that has been the challenge and the process, and it has improved substantially in speed and time, not just because of the design changes, but also the comfort that ISRO has also got, and therefore they reduce your tolerances a little bit, give you a little more leeway from a machining perspective. The number of inspections reduce once you get more comfortable making a particular item. And as those processes change and improve, um, it allows for a much faster execution process on the rocket motor casing. So that's the first part of the question. And part two, absolutely, I just spoke about it. I'm not sure if rocket motor casings and the most critical components of those rocket motor casings will move to composites that quickly, because it's too crucial a part of the launch vehicle for it to move to composites. But there are many other parts of the launch vehicle around the rocket motor casings and above the rocket motor casings that can definitely move to a composite space. So what we will do with the composites business is we'll enhance our portfolio, not eat into our portfolio yet, but ultimately, yes, I'm quite sure that we will cannibalize our own business when we get into the composite space to move more towards the composite side. So yeah, good question.
And how is it that ISRO has been kind of working with you on analyzing failure and making sure what are the process that say set into place in all of this to handle failure and to learn from all of it? Because of course, since processes evolve over the last 50 years, you might have a very deep history on how do you make sure that engineering stuff evolves to have high reliability. Can you give some examples on this process that they set into place to make sure failure is contained?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, well, luckily we've never had a failure situation at a launch vehicle level. So we've never had to deal with that issue. But I think the way they've dealt with it is, first of all, we have people from inspection agencies living with us in Walchandnagar 24 hours 7. So we've given them homes here, and they live here on campus all the time. And so we have a day-to-day interaction with their people on the shop floor. um, our documentation process is extremely robust, and of course in the olden days it was all on paper, but now we use methods of everything's online. It's real time, in the sense that when there's a potential machining or welding failure on the shop floor, it's photographed, it's written up, and it's put on the system immediately. They get to see it that very moment. There's video conferencing facilities that we now have between each other, where we talk daily. Their inspection engineer here and our team speak, and then there's a very, very time consuming and very detailed uh, process of root cause analysis, and then changing the design at the ISRO level if need be, or changing the process at the Walchandnagar level if need be, and then that is put into the system. It is tested again before that item is then released for further processing. So actually, mistakes and failures can be extremely costly, not from a money perspective, but from a timeline perspective. And so, hence the need to be insanely a perfectionist on the shop floor well in advance, because the impact of basic manufacturing or welding failure can lead to a postponement of a launch, which Walchandnagar never wants to be responsible for. So it's a very, very, very deep and robust process to ensure failures don't happen. But it's not like they never do, and when they do, they are dealt with in a very, very collaborative manner. I think the advantage of having a person living here full time makes it that much more quicker and robust.
And you did talk about, the scaling from SLV to PSLV to GSLV and so on. And also the other part of scaling that you talked about is volume production from once every 6 years or to 12 or 18 every year. So there are two scaling factors that come into play, the size and the volume. What has
Yeah.
been your experience of going through that?
So it's been exciting. It's been challenging, of course, because I mean, we're talking about uh, diameter size changes. We're talking about tonnage changes. We're talking about material changes, and then we are talking about numbers increasing, like you said, right? So it's been extremely challenging, but I think it's also been a very, very exciting journey because we see we see the game changing work that we're doing, right? And it takes time. It's taken a lot of investment and a lot of effort. It's taken a lot of capital, but because of the scaling, we now see huge return from that. So I would say in the first 40 years of being associated with ISRO, we made no money. In fact, we may have lost money. But you know what? That the aim was not just about making money. It was about being there for the nation, right? And now we see the scaling giving us a return on our investment, and we want to keep investing, and we want to keep doing new things. And the beauty of this whole exercise is that while the scaling is happening, whether it's like you said, whether it's going from PSLV to GSLV, now GSLV Mark 2 or 3 or whatever it is, and then now the Gaganyaan project. What we are also seeing is the opportunity for us to get into new areas that we earlier never thought about, right? So um, with the Gaganyaan project, the pod in which the astronauts are going to sit, right? That is one of the most critical components that has to be put on the top of that launch vehicle, which never was needed in the past. So now, how do we work with ISRO to figure that out, design it, make it? What will it be made out of? How will we, manufacture it? So there's a huge amount of new opportunities that are coming from this whole space scaling up business, and it's extremely exciting and a little bit overwhelming because you feel like wanting to dive into everything, and that may not be the best strategy to use, and to sort of stick to what we know best, and figure out which are the areas that we can really add value, where Walchandnagar really excels, and not try and do too many things uh, in the excitement of the growth and euphoria of like you said, NewSpace India.
Right. And does the quality constraints, the processes, and the reliability of having a human-rated rocket, and the Gaganyaan project itself, how aggressive or how difficult it is considering the usual PSLV, GSLV stuff?
Yeah, it's much more. I mean, it's at you know 10x levels of quality checks, of inspections, of every little thing is now looked at 10 times more deeply, because we're now risking lives. Earlier we were never risking lives, right? It was all a unmanned program, and it should be that way. I walk around my shop floor and I talk to our workers here, and the only thing I can tell them is that you should, when you work on this project, the one thing that you must always remember, that it's your child that's in that spaceship or in that launch vehicle, and that is what drives people's juices to say मेरा बच्चा वहां ऊपर जा रहा होगा तो मैं कैसे काम करूंगा. And so that's really, but it is the government, ISRO, us, we are all looking at this project as a extremely deeply, and it has to really go off better than any of our previous launches. And the quality levels of the product that we supply for Gaganyaan have to be the best we've ever supplied, and we've supplied the best already. So how are we pushing our teams? We have a separate quality team just for that project. Their focus is only on those equipments. We have a lot of training, lot of um, uh, pre-preparatory work that has gone into training everyone on the shop floor on the importance of this project. The entire Gaganyaan team from ISRO has come to Walchandnagar and spent 2 days with us explaining the changes that will be there in this launch vehicle versus the ones in the past. And I think we're all in and all aligned to the we're putting up a brand new PPT facility just for that project. It's a, I think, a 13-15 crore capital asset, and it's a separate location in my plant, which will only do pressure testing for all the components that go only for Gaganyaan, and for all other launch vehicles are in a different facility. So everything is different because of the size, scale, and importance of of this project. Yeah.
So you did, start collaborating at very early days. You talked about like the secrecy that was needed at that point of time. Was there a deep impact of sanctions or trade barriers or anything like that? Because India was not as accepted as it is today with US and other countries.
Yeah, of course there was. I mean, nothing to do with ISRO, but when we did the Pokhran test, in 19, when was it, 74, 75, 80, whenever it was, and we did the nuclear tests. Obviously, we were one of the companies that built components for our all. Even today, we build for all our nuclear reactors in India. The civilian ones, and we make missiles, and we make a lot of defense equipment, and so in the 80s we were part of that blacklist that the US did issue, where us and Larsen and Toubro and maybe there were two three other private sector companies, maybe Godrej and Boyce as well, where we were blacklisted for a number of years, where we couldn't export to the United States of America and a couple of some other countries. But you know what? It didn't affect us much because we didn't have much of an export business at that time, and our export business was mainly to Eastern Africa for sugar equipment, and that continued. So yeah, okay, prevented us from traveling to the United States for a few years till that blacklist was removed, or that whatever, that blockade was removed. But I think this was all part and parcel of being a patriotic nation building company. It's exactly like it was pre-independence India, where my grandfather and my grand uncle had to face what they had to face with the British. We took it in our stride that we're building something great for our country, and that's all that matters. But now there's nothing to worry about.
So as you see, the transition has been that, since you are involved since the early days, the risk of IP generation has been with ISRO. And it's the case with many other companies, including, Godrej and Boyce and L&T and many others. The early partners of ISRO have had to rely on ISRO engineers developing a lot of the IP and act as manufacturing partners over time to deliver the capability. And one of the things that I foresee for India to evolve is companies like you to become product level owners, like where you
Yep.
control the complete IP, where you are able to then export a lot of this to other markets as
Yep.
well. So
Yep.
how difficult is the transition? Has the transition been already happening with you guys, and what do you see there?
Well, no. So you're right. The IP today of all designs rest with ISRO, but manufacturing IP doesn't rest with ISRO. That's with me. Yeah, we may share our drawings, but we don't share all our toolings and jigs and fixtures and manufacturing drawings with them. And we've made it very clear that all process drawings will remain with us, because tomorrow I would never. You can't. You can just give everything to some fourth party who will just start manufacturing. Of course, not so easy, but so that remains with us. And I mean, I think the government is also quite cognizant of the fact that that companies need to start developing their own products and their own IP. We haven't started yet, but it is part of my mission and sort of agenda over the next 5 to 10 years for the Walchandnagar to become a product creation company in not just space, but in many of our divisions. I think the new space program rules that have just been announced, whatever, 6, 8, 10 months ago, is going to lend itself to a lot of entrepreneurship in the space program. Um, I spoke maybe 4 or 5 months ago at a seminar where we talked about this, and I'm a big believer and a big proponent of supporting a lot of these startup companies rather than Walchandnagar try to do this ourselves. Um, so I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of companies that are in startup mode today. Some of them want to make launch vehicles, small satellite launch vehicles, so to be, in sort of near, or in lower orbit, not in upper orbit. And we've talked to many of them to either make an investment or do some bootstrapping where we can manufacture their launch vehicles for them. And we've talked with people who are doing satellites. We've talked with people who are doing other types of components. We've talked. So there's a I think there's most definitely a environment being created already in India of people who are uh, young people who can drive this forward. I think Walchandnagar is, from that perspective, yes, we are a very innovative company from a manufacturing side, but I would like to think that I would rather look at maybe bringing in youngsters who are already in startup mode and maybe bringing them under the Walchandnagar umbrella, and allowing them to work independently to create these IP level products going forward. But I think that is the future. I think ISRO has understood it, that they can't do every single launch vehicle in the out of India. They have huge infrastructure which they need to use, and so by allowing people to now build their own launch vehicles and other uh, space research components, you allow them to use your infrastructure, and there's again a public private partnership. And the way they nurtured us for 30, 40 years, my dream is that I should be able to nurture 3, 4, 5 young entrepreneurs over the next 20, 25 years to build out that business. And if there can be a SpaceX and an Elon Musk in America, I don't see why there can't be three in India, right? And that's the dream that people should have and fight with. And Walchandnagar will most definitely be driving for it, either internally or through a sort of um, to create that, that I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but the environment, I would say, for young people to thrive with us.
Kudos to you, for such vision and such perspective in that sense. So you did talk about how ISRO supported with you in the early days in some of this materials and capital in investment and so on. What would it take in terms of change and mechanisms that we have today to have companies do products in India with either ISRO or other government institution funding, or new schemes or new procurement mechanisms for product level stuff to come out of India?
Yeah. So I think where the problem lies in India is that the government needs to come up with a much more free based, a policy that encourages young people to become entrepreneurs and make mistakes, right? I think the whole taxation policy, licensing policy, permissions policies, funding policies all need to be drastically changed, and a lot of the bureaucracy to be removed if you're an entrepreneur and you're starting a new business, right? I think that is the challenge that most people face, and it's what frustrates people and drives them away from wanting to take the time and energy and effort to spend 3, 4, 5 years creating a product, right? And um, and I think organizations like ISRO, I think now they're putting together um some funds where they should have a sort of friends and family type angel investing fund, which they can give money to various people who are doing projects. I think a little bit of that is now happening, but I think it's more the bureaucracy and the tax policies, angel tax, and I don't know what other taxes there are in this country that are really dissuading people from really putting their energies into building these new age businesses. So I would urge the government and all people involved to really remove all of these restraints from the whole policy document and structure, so that people can be free to sort of start their own businesses, be free to fail, and be free to stand up again and continue the journey, right? And that ISRO through their agency should support these people with some sort of a, I don't know, you call it a prize or a fund or whatever it may be.
There are some procurement innovation happening in many other
Sorry,
countries.
sorry, 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 Narayan. One more point, because you addressed it, academia. I think there needs to be much more deeper engagement between ISRO, our big institutes, and not just entrepreneurs, because I think entrepreneurs are doing it. They are, they're graduating out of the IITs or the NITs and all of these engineering companies, and their professors there are engaging with them and giving them advice, advisory board and things like that, to nurture them to develop things. But I think I think established industry like us does not spend enough time with academia and ISRO, three of us together, in doing a lot of research, for next generation product and IP generation. Right? I'm a graduate of University of Michigan, and I know what the aerospace engineering department at the University of Michigan over there is doing with regards to new technologies on thrust and using electric from a thrust and saving of fuel and things like that. I mean, it's amazing the kind of work that comes out of academia. So I think that needs to become also a big focus, for all of us. So sorry, I just wanted to add that in.
Right. And one of the things there is procurement innovation in terms of, let's say, incentivizing investment alongside industry. And for example, there are schemes in Singapore, for example, where the government will say that if you, as a mature industry, is going to invest in a startup, for example, right, and you have, anyways, the business mindset of knowing what works, what doesn't work, which is a worthy investment or not, and the government may say that. We are willing to match your investment in any company one to one, so that you have a 50% rebate on that investment. And in Singapore, this happens where they match it, and then at over time they can pull out the investment at a small interest rate or even for free. And you can, so basically, when if the company matures and if that grows as a business, you can repay back the government share and hold the equity that the government had initially. I mean, this is the sort of procurement, investment innovation that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% right. And I would say that in that kind of a strategy is most relevant when it comes to encouraging established industry to invest in the most difficult part of ISRO's challenge, which is the procurement of the material, as in the plates that they use, right? I mean, the the kind of material that they are using currently, nobody in India does, right? It's imported from some, East European destinations and things like that, right? We don't even know where the material comes from. So if you are to make this a make in India concept, and we are already doing it from a fabrication side of it, or simple things like fasteners, valves, pipes, all of that gets done in India. But the largest part of the procurement, which is your plates and your steel and your metal and whatever, the alloys, if you could incentivize some of your big steel producers and mills and established industries in India to start setting some of this up here in India through the mechanism that you mentioned, I think that will go a long way in reducing our dependency of a very, very crucial resource uh, as time goes by. And because I know that at least on the defense side, some some steel mills in India, some of the more established ones, Jindal and others, have already started manufacturing materials, plates of very rare materials from a defense side, because they've seen the potential now with the whole Atmanirbhar Bharat program on the defense side, that there's going to be a huge demand and scale up for indigenization, for cost optimization, and that will have to come from buying a lot of the input material from within India. And I think your point is very well taken, and something like that would go a long way in encouraging industry to put more capital asset on the ground in India.
So there's one big funding gap in India as far as I see for startups. 10 years ago, there was hardly any investment into space startups in India. Over the last 10 years, things have been evolving. Now, a few companies have got a few, maybe $1 or $2 million, maximum $5 million of investment, maybe 30, 40 crores. The best companies, best startups have gotten maybe that kind of funding. But you cannot realize a full rocket or a full satellite system capability with that sort of an investment, right? You need maybe 100+ crore kind of investment. And in my opinion, there are no institutional mechanisms in banks or others who will give any sort of investment like this anyways, in India for these companies. And for me, what I see is companies, let's say, who are legacy large companies, maybe Tatas or something like that, or the Hero Group, or some huge corporate group that has hundreds of companies under them, who have the balance sheets that can run in the thousands of crores, may want to diversify and invest into these companies to have space as a area of investment for them, and this might be the only source of capital for them. So what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's all a matter of time, right? I think we're living in a world where we've gotten so used to large sums of money coming from all the VCs and the PEs into all of these, online and app-based platforms, which are giving crazy valuations, that I think our patience levels have become a little low. Um, the same thing happened with defense, right? Till 5 years ago, nobody wanted to touch the defense sector. No big industry wanted to touch the defense sector. Okay, and now we've seen that there is a huge amount of scalability in the defense business. There are a lot of foreign companies that want to come and play in the defense space in India, and therefore a lot of the big groups are now putting money there. Okay, we've seen it. I don't need to name them. We know every big business house in this country has now a defense company. So I think space is going to go the same. Airspace will go the same route. I think everyone is on a wait and watch philosophy. I've spoken to a lot of the big families, as well as some of the venture capitalists and angel investors, and everyone's view is that until we see more progress on India's space policy that has just been announced a year ago, and we actually see some traction in rewriting the space rules and the rules of engagement with ISRO and how we'll use their facilities and all of that. Unless we see some movement there, nobody's really going to throw the big money at startups, uh, and I don't think there's a need to. I've talked to many players, and the ones who need the maximum amount of money, I would say someone like a Skyroot or we've talked with them a lot. They the target right now over the next 2 years is, yeah, we need enough money to do one or two successful launches, and to do one or two successful launches, it's quite easy, if industries like ours participate, to do a little bit of a bootstrapping model, and so you don't need much capital per se, and you use some sort of a bootstrapping model, share some equity, and you at least in the next year or two get the launch vehicle ready, or you get the satellites ready, or whatever business you're in. And that's the time when you would have rewritten, all the laws and the rules would have all been written down. And only when people see that that traction is actually happening, will then the business houses start really, grabbing these startups and bringing them into our fold. So I think it's inevitable, and I think it's a matter of time. But I think everyone who's doing a startup needs to have patience and not think that you're going to get SpaceX valuations today in India. It's not going to happen, right? I mean, what Elon Musk has created in the United States of America is a one-off from that point of view, and that too has happened because of the amount of help NASA has given him, right? So we need to play that out. ISRO is in the same mode. They want to collaborate and help startups succeed, and it's a matter of time. It'll happen, but I think patience is necessary, most definitely.
One of the criticisms I have in that sense is that we don't see a conglomeration of industry associations for space, which can bring out a common voice for government policymakers to create the change as it is. What is your perspective on all of this? Do we see this happening now?
Yeah, I think it'll happen. I think again, it's a matter of time. We didn't have bodies like this for defense either, and now we have the Society of Indian Defense Manufacturers, and we have a FICCI and CII uh, both have a massive defense council now, which is doing a lot of this work on Atmanirbhar, and CII is doing a lot of work on the aerospace side. In fact, the conference that I spoke at a few months ago, I think was a. Ooh, I don't want to upset anyone, but I think it was a CII conference, um, and and it's happening. And when I talk to a lot of these startups, and I talk to Lasser and Tubro, and this is exactly the talk, that we will create a chamber and a council that will work together to promote both the established players' business, as well as give the startups the strength and the hand on their head that they need to build their businesses. But you're right, it has been completely neglected because it was never needed, right? It was always Walchandnagar having to deal with ISRO, or a L&T had to deal with ISRO, and that's it. And now there will be 30 players in the program, and so we do need to get together and help in creating policy. And this started, right, 6-7 months ago, when industry was called, not 6-7 months ago, I'm sorry, over a year ago, when industry was called for a meet, and we spent 2 days together, and we all brainstormed on what we wanted the new space policy to be, what were the key things that needed to be brought in there. And ISRO has taken most of those suggestions into the final policy document that was then discussed with the government, and is now being ratified. So yes, you're right, it didn't exist, but I think the time is, it's not far when this will happen.
How do you see, you participating more aggressively in export at the moment? Because from a lot of the legacy customer or industry base in India has ISRO as its core customer, and one of the challenges that I see is that there's very little like B2B interaction, especially when it comes to foreign exports. How do you see this evolving for you?
Yeah, I'm not sure we will be doing too much export in the near future for space programs across the world. Um, I'm not sure the cost of manufacturing and then transporting the size of equipment that we make across the world may be if cost effective, but it's something that we'll explore. But we are definitely going to be playing a very big role in export our aero structures, and maybe civilian and military aircraft business. more than the space launch vehicle business. Um, because I think that is a lot more easier to handle and export and manufacture and export than the large size components that we make for launch vehicles. Having said that, it is something that we are focusing on, and our team here is examining. I just feel like the opportunity over the next 10, 15, 20 years in India is so big that um, we would rather invest our capital and resources in ensuring that we maintain our leadership position there and scale those businesses up, and help our Indian companies to become global, right? And in that process, if we therefore then start exporting, that's a completely different kettle of fish. But most definitely our aerostructures and our aircraft business, aerostructure side, we'll definitely look at export. Defense, of course, we are already in talks with many companies to be part of their global supply chain. So there I see a lot of potential. May not be immediate potential on the aerospace side of it, frankly.
That's a very interesting perspective. I mean, I am very glad to hear that you see such strong demand coming from India, and also the growth and the support that you want to give to all of these companies is very, very laudable in that sense. And as far as the new technologies are concerned, there's a number of companies that are investing into additive manufacturing, 3D printing kind of technologies for rockets. The most flamboyant one in the media is the relativity space guys who want to 3D print entire rocket engines and the entire rocket itself eventually, or so on. How real is this? How ready is the market for all of this?
I think it's very real, and I think if anyone thinks that 3D printing is not going to be the future of manufacturing many things, then they need to come out of hibernation immediately. We are very clear that that 3D printing in what we do is still a ways away. But if you listen to anybody in Singularity or any of these exponential concepts, what you think is very far away and how fast it reaches you is are two different animals. So we are not sleeping on it, but I do believe that a lot of the things that we do cannot be 3D printed. Yes, okay, you can maybe 3D print one rocket engine, but I don't think it can be 3D printed at scale and cost effectively yet. That doesn't mean it's not going to be 3D printed at scale and cost effectively 5 years from now. So we have to be on the ball. We have to be absolutely at the cutting edge of all technology. Um, we believe that our investment should be more in on the composite side today than on the 3D printing side, because the catch up is going to be faster on the material side rather than on the process of manufacturing side. But we are definitely already researching a lot on 3D printing. I've even looked at a couple of 3D printing companies in India to bring into the Walchand fold. Nothing has happened yet, but most definitely. And smaller parts for the launch vehicles, though, is anyway a no-brainer. Um, Interestingly enough, 3D printing can be very useful for us for manufacturing of prototypes and sampling, and even certain small size jigs and fixtures can potentially be 3D printed rather than manufactured the way we manufacture it. So there could be a much faster uh, 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 help from 3D printing, not so much on the product manufacturing side, but on the back end support side. So, most definitely, it is the way of the future. Um, Again, the materials matter. Whether you can actually 3D print in the materials that you may need for space travel is questionable. But all of that is going to evolve over time, and it's ultimately it's going to happen. So maybe not for 5, 10 years, but it's going to happen. No question.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. You really touched upon this fact of supporting startups in India and so on. So, is this something that you see at your personal capacity as a business leader for Walchand and also for your scale up effort, through them? Or do you think that other business leaders like you who have been, in doing business with ISRO for 50 years, maybe Godrej and Boyce and, L&T and others, are they also of the same opinion that they will be investing in some of these companies?
I hope so. I mean, I can't speak for them, but I do hope, and I said it many times, that it is actually our duty and responsibility to support entrepreneurs and startups to succeed in India. Because, and maybe I look at it differently, being a third generation, family business from a, you know, from a lineage that comes from doing only for India and not thinking about anything else. And Godrej family is exactly the same. Mr. Naik at Larsen and Toubro is absolutely exactly the same from a mindset perspective, and I'm sure the rest of the team there is. And I think we all have to realize that it is our fiduciary and national duty to really find ways and means of helping all of these startups grow and not worrying about creating competition for ourselves in the future. And like I said, ISRO did it to us 50 years ago. If they hadn't held our hand for 10, 15 years, we wouldn't be where we are today. And I want, in my lifetime, over the next 20 years, I mean, we may not be in a position today because even as an organization, we are coming out of a very difficult sort of time period. And, we're kind of just coming back on our feet. May not be today, but let's say 2 years from now we start, or a year and a half from now we start. And 20, 25 years from now, I want 5 companies in this country to come up to me and say, you know what, I want to thank you that, you took me under your wing and you mentored me, or you gave us a chance, and we are here. Here's where we are today. And I think absolutely it is our responsibility to make it happen. And I do hope that the other companies and industry are thinking on the same lines.
What has been the impact of COVID on your business and the production and then what do you see as recovery?
Yeah, actually, we've been pretty okay. I think we've blessed that we only shut our factory for 1 month, March 23rd to April 23rd. And I think we're a little bit that way, like I said, blessed that we are an isolated township far away from, any of the big cities, and all our employees live on campus with us. So we were able to sort of uh, completely block all traffic into our complex. And so the impact of COVID and the cases on our employees and their families has been negligible, if I may say so. And we've been running at full capacity. We're continuing to deliver segments and products to all our customers. I think the government has done a phenomenal job of controlling this. I know that there's lots in the room, in the in the news of how the cases have risen and things like that. But a population of 1+ billion people, there's no way anyone can say anything about what measures our country and our government has taken to protect us all. ISRO has and DRDO and all have been paying us on time, taking material on time. And it's been business as usual for us. So I think we are very, very lucky. Seeing the pain that a lot of people have gone through over the last 6, 7 months, I think we've been very lucky, and I hope that everyone comes out of this sooner rather than later. Not just in India but globally, because I think it's gone on for too long, frankly.
Right, last couple of questions. So one is on talent. How do you see people, the skill set of people matching the requirements you have? How do you see that going further? Are there any openings for people to join you to, work on the exciting projects that you have?
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge. Finding ready-made people out of our colleges and universities is difficult. That's not to say that our universities and colleges are not good. They're brilliant. In some places, I think our curriculums are a little outdated and need to be upgraded. And I think a lot of colleges and universities are now doing that. We have historically never recruited from international colleges. We've usually been an Indian colleges and universities recruitment company. But I am seeing a shift in a lot of people who have studied abroad wanting to come back to India and get into doing the kind of exciting work that we do. And including people who have studied aerospace engineering. I even had a chat with a young kid a couple of days ago who's actually studied aerospace engineering, and so I see both at the worker level and at the management and engineering level uh, uh, challenges in the curriculum. And so we internally in Walchandnagar have a very robust training process. And we put both our worker trainees that we bring in at the worker level, as well as our GETs and our MTechs that we bring in at a management level, a 2 year, 3 year, very deep training program to bring them up to speed with the processes and technologies that we have in Walchandnagar, and then we put them through the sort of process. So it is one of the biggest focus areas for us going forward. And with regards to openings, yeah, we're always looking for good people. So I'm more than happy to look at any resumes that people may want to send. Anyone who wants to come and work with Walchandnagar, we are always looking for good people. There's no debate there, and we're more than happy to look at people who are keen to work in this, as you rightly said, extremely exciting time in a very exciting industry.
So the final question is, what do you see the future as? What is your projection, or where the industry will stand, where Walchandnagar will stand in 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah, difficult to be Nostradamus here, but uh, I think I think the space program in India is going to explode. There's no debate about that. I think it's already exploded. I mean, we've seen it, but I think not to be cliched, but the sky is really not the limit, and we got to go way beyond that. And I see in 10, 15 years, I see a lot more launch vehicles from private sector. I see a lot more satellites in the sky owned by private companies, and a leasing model being structured. I see an Indian space station for sure. I see us having traveled to many other planets and areas. And I see, you see, the one thing I've always said is, what historically India has been 25 years behind the US and Russia when it came to space exploration, right? I would say that we have narrowed that gap to maybe 10 years or maybe 15 years. Okay, let's say 15 years. We are still 10 to 15 years behind them, because you know what? They put a man in space in the 1960s, and we're going to put a man or people in space in 2021 or 22, right? So we are, from that perspective, 50 years behind. But I would say, just generally from a technology perspective, we are 15 years behind. I see that in 15 years, we will cover up a large portion of these 15 years. And I think our scalability of technology, and and there's a big if here, the government actually puts in place that environment for startups and for people to experiment and give them the freedom to experiment, then and then only will I see this gap narrowing very quickly. And India could potentially cover the gap, and maybe we'll be maybe 5 years behind, uh, you know, uh, say the US 15 years from now, or 10 years from now. So I see a lot of good stuff. I see Valchanagar participating in all of these programs. I see us hopefully making our own launch vehicle one day, if not ourselves, but maybe through a investment in a launch vehicle manufacturing company. I definitely see us looking at uh, space as a service, as a business model. It's a different kind of SaaS, and and I definitely see us participating in any large infrastructure product projects that may occur, including if we are going to build our own space station in space, then how that gets done and what the materials are, and how we can participate in that. So we are very ambitious as an organization. It's good to have, as Jim Collins says, big, hairy, audacious goals. I don't know how much we'll be able to achieve, but yeah, we'll be there, uh, leading for sure.
Chirag, it's been a really fun and exciting, and as well as almost a visionary conversation. And it's been so insightful for me. I think it's one of the best conversations I've had with anybody in India who has had a very long, drawn out vision into what's happened in the previous past and what's going to happen in the future. I thank you so much for taking so much of your time in having this conversation with me.
No, Narayan, thank you for inviting me. It's very kind of you. I got to tell you, this is the first podcast I've ever done in my life. So and it's a topic that is so meaningful to me, and and I thank you for inviting me, and making this so interesting and allowing me to sort of speak my thoughts. And I hope we engage more in the future, and I look forward to the feedback that comes from the podcast. I hope your listeners enjoy this, and of course, let them be feel free to contact me at any time whenever they need to. I'm more than happy to answer more questions. Thank you.
Thank you for staying until the end. The NewSpace India podcast has recently started a Patreon account in order to collect your support to produce a documentary that captures the pioneering work done by many of the generation of scientists during the Sarabhai and the Satish Dhawan era. We believe that this will overcome the gap that none of the institutions in India have gone on to create a documentary style space history project that captures both anecdotes and personal history of many of the pioneers of that generation. Please do check out the Patreon account and do consider making a contribution that will help produce this documentary. Thank you for your contributions.